Well, hello and welcome back to Masterbooks, the Recipe for Homeschool Success Summit. We're so excited to be with you today. I am joined by Angela Odell and Carrie Bailey, and they are here to talk to you about Math K and how important it is as a foundational resource going into math lessons for a living education. Some people like to skip things to make it easier on themselves. So we're just going to give you a little bit of feedback on why not to do that. And so you will have be able to make an educated decision for your child. So I want these ladies to tell you a little bit about themselves and how they're related in the Masterbooks family as far as being authors. And then we'll get started with our questions.
Well, in this case, I helped Carrie with the Math K. And honestly, she did the majority of the work that went into it. I did the story. And we worked together to figure out to make sure that there were all of the prerequisites covered to go into Math 1. But it is really her great ingenuity where it comes to that early childhood development that she's so good at in math and Simply K. And you did a preschool one too, didn't you?
Yes, ma'am.
So those. And so, yes, I'm just here to support her work in this.
Well, the story is an important part.
Right. It is. And it's important that, in the whole topic of what we're talking about here, it is important to not just skip K, especially when you have that really young child who is not ready developmentally. And it's just a great stepping stone into the math lessons, the rest of the series.
Good deal. All right, Carrie, tell us about yourself.
Okay. So I have written Stepping Stones, which is a preschool curriculum, Simply K, which is kindergarten. It covers language arts, social emotional skills, kind of a little bit of everything, even a little bit of like social studies in it. And then I co-wrote with Angela the Math K, and also have the Catch On to Cursive. And then I know that the handwriting for print is coming out soon, and that is Handwriting A to Zoo, and it has a focus on zoo animals. And I'm excited about that course. It should help fill in the gaps for basically everything that is needed. And on co-writing Math K, basically I have a tendency to put too much content when I write. Maybe everyone does, but I have a tendency to do that. And so they were like, this book count is getting too long and we need to pull out math content. And so then they asked if, I might want to write with Angela, which I'm like, yeah, because this was my first time authoring. So I had no idea. And so then to work with someone like her who was more seasoned, I was super excited. And she was very easy to work with. She basically was like, okay, I'll do the stories and you've kind of done the rest, and let's just make sure that this flows into Math 1. And so that's basically what we did. I just would give her the topics so that way it would like align with Simply K, and that way if you're doing those together, you're talking about the same topics during that week.
Okay, so Simply K can be done at the same time as Math K, and the topics align days of the week. That's great information.
Yes. And if my memory is correct, because it has been a while, Math K, I originally had it for 3 days a week, but because all of the other math lessons for Living Education series had it as 5 days, they wanted to keep that for consistency. So we basically put in 2 extra days. That's the student being able to practice and review what they have learned from that week and maybe even previous weeks. So that's another component of it.
Okay. Well, let's talk about why it's important, because as I mentioned before, sometimes people have already been working with their student to help them learn some basic concepts. And so they might be interested in skipping Math K and going directly to Math 1 based on the readiness test or the thing that people use to determine where their child should go. But we've heard Randy say many times, and other people, with you being the author, we'd like to hear from you why it is important, even if they know the concept, to go ahead and do the Math K workbook anyway.
Well, so I often like to think about our first experience with formal education, whether it's homeschool or in a public school setting or a private school setting. You always want that first experience to be something positive. And you don't want it to be where the student is too challenged, or, for instance, there wasn't Math K, so I started my middle son on math lessons level 1.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that happened was we got to that place value village and he was not quite ready. It's, a little bit abstract and he just wasn't there yet. And so I had to just pause it. I did the same thing with reading for him, just paused it and waited and then came back to it later and he was fine. But a lot of kids will do that. And so this kind of gives them just an introduction to math and gets them thinking mathematically, gets them engaged in their learning. We still included several different recipes and different hands-on activities that even through the stories, it all connects. And so that's one of the cool things about that is that we were able to keep those components of the whole series in Math K as well. And again, the importance of that is to lay a foundation. It's so we don't, don't skip anything. It kind of gives the backstory of Charlotte and Charlie and just continues throughout the whole series. So it lays that foundation.
So, Angela, tell us a little bit about the storyline, and why that is an important part of lessons that stick, or math concepts that stick with them and carry on.
Well, it's like the other levels of the math series. It's stories are something that kids connect to. Mm-hmm. And it shows them on that basic level, it brings the concepts that they're learning into real life. So it brings it to them in context. They're not wondering, when am I going to ever use this? They're actually making friends with the kids in the story who are doing some of the very same things they're doing in real life, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. So it brings like a friendship. That relationship with the story, the characters of the story, and it also helps them to create a relationship with what they're learning.
That's wonderful. So I'd like for you, Carrie, to tell us about the brain development and the muscle coordination that's going into Math K as a part of the reason not to skip it.
Before I do that, I would like to talk just a second about those stories. Okay. I'm going to read a quote that says, "Engagement is achieved when students converse with each other about the content." So one of the things that Angela is very well known for is narration breaks and retelling back what they've just learned. And that right there is why it's important, because that engagement of talking about it, knowing what they've learned, stating it back. I think I read a statistic too. We retain 90% of what we teach someone else. So that's what narration does. It actually increases that. And it's like us teaching you then, hey, this is what this was about. And so it just increases the retention of the material so much more.
That's so important.
Yes, ma'am. And as far as fine motor, there will be some things in here. Pretty much if your child can hold, a pencil or a chunky marker or a chunky crayon. The reason I'm saying chunky is because those are easier for little hands. We've seen the x-rays where you see that a child's hand is not even, all their bones is not fully developed. And so depending on what age, I know some people will even try to use this with preschoolers, depending on what age they're using it with, their child's hand may not be fully developed. So you can also just have them, trace things with their finger first, and then try to use like some type of marker. Usually if you can get one that's shorter, that's even better as well, because it forces them to have a good pencil grip and not learn to just fist something. Brain development, basically by the stories, we are taking the real world and saying, here is an abstract math concept, and we are applying it to something that they can see. So we're making it concrete. And so anytime we can do that for a student, then they're going to be like, oh, and their brain's going to say, hey, I made that connection. And then that is going to stick more with them. Okay. There's also a whole lot about brain development on how we, there's been a huge thing with like even the science of reading, where they've studied our brains and watched kids as they're reading or as they're doing math or other things. And they can take even what they've learned from students reading and apply that into math. And so they basically can, your above average student needs to see something, I think it's like 10 to 14 times before it really sticks. And then your average student needs to see it up to like 20 times for it to stick. And then your struggling student, not necessarily any child with like an actual specific disability, they actually, I want to say it was up to 40 times. And then those students who have like dyslexia, dyscalculia, which is basically dyslexia for math, is dyscalculia. So those students who have that, or even ADHD or other disabilities, like even a learning disability for math, it could take up to 400 times of them seeing something before they recall it. Yeah. So when people want to just skip something, math, I used to say math, unlike language arts, but really that's not true, because you do have the building blocks in language arts as well. But math especially, if you don't have that foundation, then you can't keep building on it. Okay. And so when there's gaps and there's holes, like when I pulled my oldest son from public school, he had so many holes. So we had to go back like 2 grade levels. And this is a child who was, he was passing all, like with flying colors, passing all of their tests. He was in the gifted and talented program. And yet when I pulled him, I'm like, oh no. And even when we did like his testing for ADHD and they do a psychological evaluation, that's one of the things, his number sense was very lacking. And then my second child, my middle one, I used math lessons, and he has had way better number sense. And I credit it to Angela's curriculum. I really do. It's the way that it was made. It flows very well, and it's not going to be the scope and sequence of like the Common Core math. It's just not. But it's more of what the scope and sequence of what we all used to do. Maybe I should say it like that. And maybe Angela has like better terms. But it works, and your kids know what they need to know by the time they get to pre-algebra, which was the goal. So.
Right. Well, that's excellent scientific research to explain how important this is. And I'm so thankful that both of you worked together to make this something that is really working for the students. We've had so many great reviews and feedback about how instead of crying, because they have to do their math, they're crying because they're finished with their book. But let's talk about that a little bit. So would this workbook, what if somebody wants to try to use it with a preschooler? Is it too old for a preschooler, or could a preschooler actually use Math K just to kind of play around and get used to the pages and have something to do while everyone else is doing their homeschool? Or what do you recommend?
Of course, I would normally recommend for a kindergartner to do it. However, we know that each child is unique, and it's all of math lessons is skill based. That's like what I just said about even my own son. So when I pulled him out, he might have been going into fourth grade, but we went back to second or third just so we could fill in and not miss concepts.
Yeah.
And I will say this too, that child, because he did those upper levels, is phenomenal at fractions. Like
Okay.
Angela, you would be so proud. Anytime I need to know anything with fractions or decimals or percents, I ask him because he knows it. He just, boom, just got it. He made a connection for him. And I've never seen anything like it. I'm like, okay. And he does it all in his head. I don't know how he does that either, but he does.
Praise God for just the creative, malleable brain.
Yes. Yes. And, but as far as preschoolers doing it, I mean, they could, especially like if you're doing our pre-K curriculum, the stepping stones, and you're wanting to add in something a little bit extra, because maybe they're wanting something extra. I think it would be fine to do that. The only thing, which isn't that big of a deal, it was important to me that when we were aligning Math K and Simply K, that those topics aligned, but it's okay. It's not going to hurt them. We just talked about how many times they can hear something before it actually sticks. So you can also think about that, like, hey, if we're going to use this for preschool, that's okay. They're going to hear some of these same topics again, and it's just going to reinforce what they learned in Math K.
Well, that brings me to my next question. Should some students go through it twice? Should they use it for practice again if they've already done it and they're not quite ready for level 1?
I do not see any harm in any of that. It honestly would depend on, is this child ready for when they get to that place value part? Because the beauty of place value is, and that's why she introduces it so quickly too, is once students can understand place value, then they are going to be able to add and subtract easier. I mean, multiply, divide, it just all flows into place value. So by them fully understanding that up front and saying, oh, well, here's how many 10s and how many 1s, and understanding that, that's going to help them later and make everything else easier. It's just sometimes the younger ones are not quite there yet in their thinking. So it would just kind of depend on that. That's the only time that I would say, okay, if you hit that wall and you need something, then yes, absolutely grab Math K and go back through it.
Okay. Well, this has been so helpful. I think it's really going to help parents know what to do and have a better grip on why they're doing it. Is there anything else either of you want to share about Math K and the brain development and the masterbooks method of education?
Well, it's nothing profound, but she's mentioned Common Core. So I can just say what I usually answer when people ask me if math lessons is Common Core. I say, no, it is not Common Core. It is common sense.
Great.
It's just an easy way to remember it.
That is helpful information because that is one of the questions we get asked.
And my son that I was telling you guys about, who had the holes in his education in math, was actually that first group of students that it started full on when he was in kindergarten. When the Common Core started. And so he's the one who did not have good number sense. And a lot of places now aren't sticking with Common Core. They don't like it, or they just use bits and pieces of it. So I think I definitely am thankful that math lessons doesn't align with that. A lot of times especially like homeschool, we'll ask, is it Common Core aligned? Usually when it is not, it still meets or usually exceeds the standards of Common Core. And in this case, that's what math lessons does.
That's wonderful news. Well, thank you both so much for the way your brains have worked together to make Math K and thus math lessons something that has worked so well for so many people. We appreciate the fact that you love the students, you've homeschooled yourself, you know what it takes. And we're just so thankful for your efforts. We're thankful for all of you who have chosen homeschool, who are interested in Math K. You can look at the reviews for the different levels of math lessons for a living education and see how it's really been a good fit for so many people. So I'm thrilled to get to work with both of you, and we are so glad you joined us for this summit. We'll talk to you, or see you at least, back on the next talk. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.